Today I'm going to chat with you about recent controversies regarding COVID-19 among a minority of the Orthodox Jewish community. It is considered appropriate to offer a talk on a Jewish topic in memory of or in honor of someone. I offer today's remarks in honor of the yahrzeit of my mother, Leona Ruth Jacobs Halperin, and in memory of the late Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom, Lord Jonathan Sacks. I will make the following disclaimers. I am neither a specialist in infectious disease nor a public health official, but my current employment places me in a position to describe to you the recent controversies regarding infectious disease outbreaks in the Orthodox Jewish community. In August of 2019, I spoke with the Bethel congregation regarding outbreaks of measles and herpes in the Orthodox Jewish community. And this afternoon, I will discuss COVID-19 outbreaks among a small minority of that community. I'm going to lay the groundwork for our talk for about 12 to 14 minutes, so I won't be uttering the word COVID-19 for a little while. And that's because I'm going to prepare the background for you so that once I begin the core of my story, we'll move quickly since the table will have been set for us. I'm going to ask and answer 9 questions. First, who am I? Well, the easiest way for me to introduce myself is that I am Sharon Halperin's husband. Sharon, the former chair of the Bethel gift shop, president, co-president of Bethel Sisterhood of Hadassah, director of the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, is well known to the congregation. I can go through life, I suppose, similar to when Jacqueline and John Kennedy landed in France in 1962, where the president said, "Let me introduce myself. I'm the man who accompanied Jackie on this trip." So I am the man who accompanies Sharon. Otherwise, I have been the chairman of radiation oncology at Duke Medical School, the vice dean of the medical school at Duke, the dean of the medical school at the University of Louisville, and the chancellor and CEO of New York Medical College. So where is it that I work? New York Medical College was founded by William Cullen Bryant. That's the same Bryant as Bryant Park behind the 42nd Street Library in Manhattan. He was a poet, a newspaper editor, and a lawyer. He was not a physician, but he did think that medicine was nuts. He didn't understand bleeding, purging, induced vomiting, leeches. He believed in fresh air, sunshine, and exercise. Now, he also believed in homeopathy, which was nuts. But homeopathy may have been quackery, but at least it didn't hurt anybody. And he thought he could build a better mousetrap and founded New York Medical College in 1860. New York Medical College is located after a period of time in Manhattan. It is now located in Westchester County, New York, about 20 to 30 minutes north of Yankee Stadium. This is the main administration building of the college, the Sunshine Cottage, called the Sunshine Cottage, because you can see the rising sun on the pediment of the building. It was originally in the 1930s a children's polio and tuberculosis facility, thus fresh air and sunshine as treatment for TB and polio, and the name the Sunshine Cottage. New York Medical College, since 2011, has been part of the Touro College and University system, as exemplified by one of Touro's buildings, this particular building being located in Flatbush in Brooklyn. Touro is the largest university under Jewish auspices in the United States, with 19,000 students. Touro is, depending on what the enrollment is, reported to be of Brandeis, 3 to roughly 6 times larger than Brandeis and 2.5 times larger than Yeshiva University. Touro has multiple undergraduate divisions, multiple DO schools, 2 pharmacy schools, a law school, graduate schools, And one way of looking at the size and scope of Touro is to note the fact that if you total up all the MDs and DOs that will graduate in May 2021, just under 4% of them will graduate from a Touro school. The largest educator of new physicians in the United States is a private Orthodox Jewish university. And while founded in 1860, New York Medical College became part of the family in 2011. What is an Orthodox Jewish university? Well, it's a university which is conducted in respect to the Jewish calendar, Jewish dietary laws. And I will offer you one illustrative story told to me by the late chairman of the Board of Trustees of Touro College and University System and New York Medical College, Dr. Mark Haston. You will almost certainly not have heard of Dr. Haston, but you will have heard of his inventions, the inventor of the machine which made uniformly shaped Cheerios, inventor of the machine which made Bugles snack food, and Pringles potato chips. Dr. Haston passed away recently, and I will tell you an illustrative story about him and about working in an Orthodox Jewish university. On the New York Medical College campus, there's a large building which used to be the professional training facility of the New York Rangers National Hockey League team. The Rangers didn't need it anymore. Eventually, the building was sold to New York Medical College, and I needed to find a tenant for it since I didn't need the building for academic purposes. I had several bids on people who wanted to use the building, and one of them was from a so-called luxury car dealer. Eventually, I found out that the luxury car dealer was a BMW dealer. I said I wouldn't have a German car dealer on our property, but at the meeting to discuss it, Dr. Haston didn't say anything. I spoke to him on the phone the next day. I said, you didn't comment about the issue about the German car dealer. He says, I couldn't hear what that man was saying. What was he talking about? So I explained to him what was being talked about. And he said, you know, I'm old. And when you're old, you sit around and you watch television a lot. And there are commercials that tell you to buy specific products because they are the result of German engineering. And that's supposed to make you feel that you're impressed with the product and buy it because it's the result of German engineering. And when I was 15, 16 years old, I was living in Kazakhstan, and I talked my way into the Red Army. And we counterattacked the Germans across Poland, and I was good with my hands, so they put me to work building pontoon bridges as we forded rivers and drove the Germans back. And in the winter of 1944, we liberated Medinik, the first of the concentration camps to be liberated by the Red Army. And the commanding officer said to me, kid, go in there, take a look around, see what you think. So I took a look around and I found the crematoria ovens and I put my hands on them. They were still warm. And I thought to myself, this is the result of German engineering. Dr. Halperin, I'm backing you on this issue 100%. You tell them to take their stinking German cars and go to, and that's what it's like to work in the culture of a Jewish university. Question 4, how would you describe in broad strokes the spectrum of the Orthodox Jewish world in which the pandemic is playing out? If you conduct demographic studies in the American Jewish community, you find that half of American Jews are not synagogue members and half are. Of those who say they are, about a third say they're Reform, about a third say they're conservative, about a fifth say they're Orthodox, and about 1/50 say they're Reconstructionists. Wait a minute, Edward. Those 4 categories don't add up to 100%. That's right. Welcome to try to do studies on Jews in which 2 of them have 3 opinions between them, which reminds me of the story of the Nobel Prize winner I. Rabi, a professor at Columbia, interviewed in the New Yorker magazine. The reporter said, Professor Rabi, what religion are you? He said, I'm an Orthodox Jew. But Professor Rabi, I have known you for 20 years. You haven't set foot in a synagogue in 20 years. That's correct, said Rabbi, and the synagogue I don't set foot in is an Orthodox one. So trying to analyze preferences for denomination amongst Jews is notoriously difficult. Of the data on Orthodox Jews in the most recent Pew demographic study of American Jews, of those American Jews who view themselves as Orthodox, About a third say they're modern Orthodox, and about two-thirds say they're ultra-Orthodox, a broad term which combines Hasidim and Yeshivish Jews. Hasidim are recognized by many American Jews by their garb, a shtreimel, a fur hat, kaftans, payas, large families, children going only to religious schools. The so-called modern Orthodox, suits and ties, open neck shirts, a black fedora, clean shaven, no payas. Jews who describe themselves as modern Orthodox tend to have a much higher level of secular education than those who identify themselves as Hasidic and Yeshivish. Two-thirds of modern Orthodox Jews surveyed have graduated from college, compared to about a quarter of those in the combined Hasidic and Yeshivish category. These latter two groups are called by some people Haredi Jews or ultra-Orthodox Jews. Hasidic Jews are part of a tradition that dates back to the 18th century. The opposition to the Hasidim, or the Misnagdim, meaning opposition Jews, sometimes called the Yeshivish Jews, life centered around the Yeshivot, include members of the Agudath Yisrael of America, and they're part of a tradition that emphasizes a kind of Talmudic scholarship exemplified in the Lithuanian or Litvak Yeshivot. One shorthand way of identifying the males is by the code of the yarmulkes, going from religious left to religious right. If you've got a colored knitted yarmulke, those are modern Orthodox, or called by some of the Haredi the Zionists. Black knitted yarmulke is next on the scale, black velvet yarmulke next, black fedora next, and then at the far right in the spectrum, the shtreimel or the fur hat of the Hasidim. Hasidim traces its origins to Israel Baal Shem Tov of the 18th century, and there are multiple Hasidic dynasties. In this slide and the next, I summarize them for you. I call your attention to the far left column and the far right column. Typically, the Hasidic dynasties are named after the city of origin in Europe. The Belz Hasidim are from Belz in Poland. The Bobovich Hasidim from Bobov and Bavova in Poland. Lubavitch, Chabad Lubavitch, Lubavitcha in Russia. Klausenberg Hasidim from Kosovar in Hungary. Among the largest groups, the Satmar Hasidim, led by the brothers Teitelbaum from Svarmarneka in Hungary, the Skver Hasidim from Skvira in the Ukraine, the Vizhnitz Hasidim from Vizhnitsia in the Ukraine. How do they differ? Besides their names and their town of origin, they have their own individual rebbes, their own dynasties. Where do these people live? Well, one way that you figure that out is by looking at maps of census data where the predominant language spoken in the household is Yiddish. In this map of Brooklyn, you can see the darker, the higher percentage of Yiddish being the primary language in the household, and you see concentrations in the neighborhoods Williamsburg, Brooklyn, Crown Heights, and Borough Park. What about theological distinctions among the Hasidim? They have different dynastic rulers, different views on Zionism, and some different nuances in religious ritual. Among other large population centers of Hasidim are the town of Kiryas Yoel in Rockland County, New York. Rockland County is just to the west of the former Tappan Zee, now Mario Cuomo Bridge. Kiryas Yoel is located in the town of Palm, New York. The word Kiryas means palm in Hebrew. Yoel is from Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, the Rebbe, thus the name Kiryas Yoel. Another large concentration is in the town of New Square. It's called New Square because when the town was named, it was a town for the Skver Hasidim. So when they said it's a new place for the square, new for the square, new for the square, it got transcribed by the clerk as New Square, and thus New Square became New Square, New York. If you look at the towns in the state of New York, where by percentage, the largest percentage of the population does not speak English, number one is Portchester, New York, where over 80% of the population speaks Spanish or Portuguese as the primary language at home. But 2, 3, and 4 are Yiddish as the primary language: Monsey, New Square, and Kiryas Yoel in Rockland County, New York. And the fastest growing city in New Jersey, Lakewood, New Jersey, now over 100,000 people, a predominantly Orthodox community. In contrast to the Hasidim, modern Orthodoxy exemplified by Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who passed away over 30 years ago from Boston, coming regularly to Yeshiva University to give his shiurim, and the recently deceased late Chief Rabbi, member of the House of Lords of the United Kingdom, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Demographic projections over the remainder of the century show that with a rapid population growth because of large family size, the Orthodox Jewish community of the United States is expected to equal the non-Orthodox community by about 2088. And if you look only at those who are synagogue members, then Orthodox synagogue membership will surpass conservative plus reform combined about 30 years hence. The pinkish blue line are those not members of any synagogue. So let's review some vocabulary words. Ashkenazim Jews of Eastern Europe, Russian and Poland. Sephardic Jews, Jews of North Africa, Spain. Litvak Jews from Lithuania, Galicianer from Galicia. The cliche is that the Litvaks are Talmudic scholars, the Galicianer are more demonstrative and excitable. Hasidim, the pious ones. Hasid means pious. Misnagdim, the opposition party to the Hasidim. Haredi, a blanket term to refer to ultra-Orthodox. The word Haredi means those who tremble. There are all kinds of jokes about Litvaks versus Galicianers, as illustrated by this Yiddish sheet music from the turn of the last century, Litvak and Galicianer. And if you think about the word Haredi, those who tremble, you see how it's equivalent in English when the Anglicans, the Church of England, what Americans call Episcopalians, wanted to make fun of the Society of Friends. They called them Quakers, the people who quake before God. So in Israel, when they wanted to refer to those who tremble when they daven, the real Frumis, the Hasidim, and the other ultra-Orthodox, they called them Haredi, those who quake, those who tremble. So the non-Hasidim kind of have synonyms, Litvak, Yeshivish, Misnagdim, Mishnagdigim, and plural. If you want to do it in Hebrew, not Yiddish, Mithnagdim. These are all terms used to refer to Jews from the Grand Duchy of Lithuania who epitomizes Lithuanian-style Talmudic learning. But if you say to me, Edward, Lithuania is a tiny, tiny country. All those Jews? Well, Lithuania wasn't always a tiny country. Here's a map of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania up to the early 15th century. And you see what a large landmass it was, encompassing large areas of modern day Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Russia. How do you reach these populations? By communication. There's an active Yiddish press. The Vorwärts online, their Blatt, their Yid, their Zeitung, all Yiddish newspapers. The Anglo-Jewish press in English, the Forward in English, online only, no longer in print. The Jewish Week in English, online, no longer in print. The Jewish Press, still in print and online, and the Jewish Standard in New Jersey, still in print and online. But the major media outlet in the United States to reach this population is a newspaper I bet lots of you never heard of, Hamodia, the daily newspaper of Torah Judaism. The Informer, published in Hebrew, French, and English, daily circulation in print and online, 160,000, referred to by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz as one of the most powerful newspapers in the Haredi community. Now to our substance of our talk, now that we've laid the groundwork. What were the events related to COVID-19 in the Orthodox Jewish community? And what happened in September and October? Remember, this is a population which is a setup for an epidemic. High population density, multiple generations living in the same housing unit, 3 times per day communal prayer with singing in small rooms closely packed together, frequent large gatherings for weddings and funerals and shivas, low science literacy. Not surprising when I spoke to the congregation last year about how measles ran rampant through the community and the problem of herpes in newborns. In September, the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, announced that there were 25 zip codes in the state of New York where the incidence of COVID-19 was 2 to 5 times higher than baseline. Governor Cuomo said that these 25 zip codes almost uniformly corresponded to Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods, and he put in place restrictions on behavior: no communal gatherings, no religious gatherings with more than 10 people. For a religious gathering, he picked the number 10 in order to make a minyan. No gathering for large weddings, no gatherings for large funerals, no gatherings for large meetings of any sort. This then somewhat devolved into a debate when the mayor of New York, Mayor de Blasio, issued also a map of where the high incidence rates were, which did not equally match the map of the state of New York. Since Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio like to argue about everything, they argued about this for a while until eventually they reached an agreement and put the new restrictions in place. There were missteps by governmental authorities. In some of these communities, there are no Yiddish-speaking contract tracers. They were using Yiddish loudspeakers to make announcements in already neighborhoods where Russian was the predominant language. And they did not take cognizance of the fact that some of these shuls can seat thousands of people. And so saying that the uniform rule was 10, whether it was a shtibel or a large shul, could have been argued not to have made sense. Demonstrations and then riots broke out. Haaretz reported on October 7th, Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn burned masks during massive protests against New York's new COVID rules. During the protest, community leaders vowed to resist new rules through litigation and civil disobedience. NBC News. Brooklyn was seething with resentment Thursday after a second night of demonstrations in the New York City borough by Orthodox Jews, infuriated by Governor Andrew Cuomo's COVID-19 clampdown on their neighborhood. The epicenter of anger was in Borough Park, where what started as a rally Wednesday night in support of President Trump turned violent, with at least 100 Hasidim setting fires and burning masks in the streets and denouncing both Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio. Masks were piled up and burned, people shoulder to shoulder, no social distancing, no masks. Trump banners waving, people in the streets, traffic blocked by large crowds, no masks, no social distancing. More Trump banners, EMTs attending to people injured, a candidate for city council, Harold Heschler, waving and inciting violence, screaming children with no masks late at night, crowds on the sidewalk and in the streets. Quoted in the New York Times on the front page of the Daily News, one of the demonstrators, "Here in Borough Park, we don't go by the laws of America. We have our own laws." Oy Revolt, the Daily News has as its front page headline, "Brooklyn neighborhood protests coped with lockdown." Prominent in the demonstrations was Mr. Teschler, candidate for New York City Council, festooned with Trump bumper stickers, calling on the crowd to attack reporters. One reporter was beaten unconscious and hospitalized. Another was chased by a mob to his car. The New Yorker magazine had a large feature story, "We Don't Protest, Borough Park's Mask Burning Orthodox Demonstrators." It was on CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell. The individual, who was believed to be a journalist, was trying to film protests with his camera when he was beaten unconscious and hospitalized. A print journalist, Jason Kornbluth, covering the story, was chased by a mob but had police protection. A mob later gathered at his home but did not break in. Mr. Teschler used words which were quoted from Maimonides, one who turns over a fellow Jew to governmental authorities. Musar, it was used in the 19th and 20th century, turning a fellow Jew over to the Tsar's police. Moshian, an informer. These reporters are informers, they're snitches, get them, get them. When Shabbos came and the riots stopped, there still was not much evidence of social distancing and mixed use of masks. No one was arrested except for Mr. Teschler, who was arrested for incitement to riot. He was the only arrest made, but that did not stop President Trump from tweeting, "See, the mayor of New York is a Democrat. See, the governor of New York is a Democrat. See, the Democrats condone arresting Jews like the Nazis did. They're taking Jews off to prison." The only person arrested, in spite of what the president tweeted, was Mr. Dishler. Shortly thereafter, New York City police halted a wedding with an estimated 10,000 guests from taking place, but the incidence rate of COVID-19 began to drop. The New York Times reported that it appeared that there were pieces of paper circulating in the community saying, don't take your child to the doctor. They might test your child for COVID, and that will raise our incidence rates. And don't get yourself tested if you don't have to, because they'll just report our incidence rates. So let's drive the numbers down. I wish to remind members of the audience that, in my view, as I said last year, too many American Jews have a rose-colored glass view of some members of this community, thinking that somehow this is the modern incarnation of Zero Mostel in Fiddler on the Roof. Some are and many are not. This community is playing hardball with public health, and I think one must be mindful of facing the facts squarely and not having a romanticized view. Well, Edward, if you're so smart, what did you do to try to stop it? Mostly what I did was ineffectual, but I, with my colleagues, took a four-pronged approach. I'll describe what I did first, which was the least effective thing to do. First thing I did was I drafted an op-ed, which I wanted to go out before Simchas Torah. I was concerned that people dancing with no masks on in close quarters were going to spread the virus by aerosolized particles. I was concerned they were going to pass Torah scrolls from one to another and not wash their hands or use Purell in between. I thought that was unwise. I wrote an op-ed to that effect. This said in part, now is the time to reflect upon our individual Torah connection and remember the imperative to protect our lives. I was joined as a co-author by several colleagues at Turo, and we submitted it to the Jewish Telegraphic Association, which promptly rejected it, saying that this was not a big issue, that conservative and Reform Jews knew not to do this, and this was simply only a small risk among some people in the Orthodox community. Fortunately, the Israel News Service picked it up and ran with it, and it did get press in the United States and Israel. Then I wrote an op-ed for the Jerusalem Post. This appeared online. It was entitled Hasidic Behavior Amid Coronavirus is a Shame Before All the Nations. It ran as the riots were coming to an end. I wrote in part, one could argue with the benefit of hindsight that government officials could have taken a more collaborative approach and asked for more community input on social distancing in houses of worship. Nonetheless, for my father alive, who would be watching the news on television, viewing the violence and saying in Yiddish, "Dosh Hashanda for the Goyim," literally, this is a shame before the nations, as a reference to embarrassing behavior by Jews witnessed by non-Jews. Those were the ineffectual things I did. What appeared to have been more effective is that Turo took out a 16-page supplement to Hamodia, a roundtable discussion on New York's COVID uptick, and the president of Turo College and University System, Dr. Alan Kadish, who you see in the right lower box, interviewed multiple Orthodox politicians and community leaders, and the transcript of the interview appeared in Hamodia, where people tried to persuade members of the community to comply with public health directives. And I am sorry to say there were no clear denunciations of the violence, but there was an accompanying article by a rabbinic scholar arguing for the importance of safety measures. And phone calls were made by leadership in the Torah system to some of the Rabbanim in the Hasidic community, members of Agudath Yisrael America. But shortly after the demonstrations, it was reported in the New York press that a Satmar Hasidic synagogue hosted a wedding with 7,000 people in attendance, a secret wedding. I listened recently to a comedian who said, how's it possible to carry off a secret wedding with 7,000 Jews? 2 or 3 of them would tell everybody what was going on. And what must it have been felt like to have not been invited? How long do you have to be in the, low do you have to be in the Satmar pecking order to have not been invited? Oh, we were going to have 9,000, but we had to cut back somewhere. Sorry, we couldn't invite you. We'll see you at the Sheva Bracha as well. trying to make something humorous, which really isn't. If you take a look at this picture of the wedding, you see the Kala, the bride there in white, dancing with a handkerchief between her and perhaps a member of her family, her father or the groom. You see the Hasidim shoulder to shoulder in the bleachers, singing, dancing. You see any social distancing? You see any masks? Me neither. In a sign of unanimity, Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio fined the synagogue a $15,000 fine to Yetev Lev de Satmar Shol, which was promptly paid somewhat peculiarly by a right-wing anti-Semitic radio talk show host who appeared on the scene with a check. Recently, the Supreme Court has overturned Governor Cuomo's restrictions, saying they're an impingement on freedom of religion in a lawsuit brought jointly by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese and by the Agudath Yisrael. One might wonder, why don't the usual approaches work as well as they used to get people off the street in these situations? And I will offer you a few hypotheses. First, let's give credit where credit is due. Hundreds of Orthodox leaders denounced the violence and called for compliance with the directives of governmental authorities and obedience to the rule of law. And I think that people must avoid having a holier than thou attitude. Remember that all Jews are responsible for one for another, and that we are obligated to balance justice with mercy. But I ask you to think about what would the world look like to you if you lived in a world defined by being communal, and then a government official told you you had to be solitary. What would the world look like to you if you lived in a news bubble where there were language barriers in general, and specifically in contact tracing, if there was general suspicion of government, if there were dense population with multiple families living in a home, and if there was poor overall science education? What would the world look like to you if you had a kosher cell phone, which is a cell phone designed to screen out the internet? If you didn't have a television in the house, and certainly didn't watch it because it's sinful? And if your sole source of news was right-wing talk radio, there really are kosher cell phones. And if you get caught with a cell phone that's not, you can be ostracized by the community. And the most popular talk show host in the ultra-Orthodox community is Rush Limbaugh, major source of news. What would the world look like to you if that's what your world was like? Whoa, Halperin, last year you told us about herpes and measles outbreaks. This year it's COVID-19. What's going on? Well, it was an election year and tensions were high. And remember that there is no religious injunction against these communities voting en masse and en bloc. And the power of their voting is well recognized by politicians in New York and other such enclaves. And it is worth taking a deep dive into the profound philosophical questions raised by the COVID-19 noncompliance and why they appear to be linked to Republican voting patterns in some Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods and the proliferation of Trump signs seen at the demonstrations. For 4 years, some Jewish journalists have observed that there are some Jewish voters who are focused on what I perceive as good for Israel as the single issue determinant of my vote, period. I will make donations to and vote for candidates who I deem pro-Israel, irrespective of a candidate's views on gun control, women's health issues, judicial appointments. Trump may be a draft-dodging narcissist with little respect for the Constitution or science, but he moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and he gave Netanyahu a blank check. So all else is forgiven. This is part of what's going on. And many of you are familiar with AIPAC, but remember that AIPAC does not make donations directly to candidates. But there is an alternative, which is NORPAC, which doesn't hesitate to make 5-figure gifts to politicians who they view as towing the line on Israel. I'd like to offer you a different hypothesis, which is the philosophical problem of if you're happy, does it really matter if you're intellectually free? And there are 2 tacks I will take on this question. One, since this is a season for it, is to talk about Hanukkah and Hellenism. Antiochus, as portrayed in the bust and on these coins, and Syrian Hellenism is an enormous challenge to Judaism, an existential challenge, responded to in this fanciful print by Judah Maccabee on the far right. To be outrageously simplified, Hellenism is truth obtained by unaided human reason. Judaism, truth obtained by revelation in part. And when faced with Hellenism, watching what the Greeks did, taking your clothes off, tossing around the old medicine ball outside with the boys, and thinking philosophical thoughts about truth and beauty is not a particularly good way to be sure there's going to be a mincha minyan. Oh, that's one such challenge. And the other is to think about the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars, what is he talking about now? Remember that Tsar Alexander I is the Tsar of the Russias, and Russia is invaded by Napoleon Bonaparte and the French forces. The 1812 overture, boom da 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 da. Napoleon is tearing down the walls of the ghetto. Napoleon is issuing writs on the rights of humankind. Napoleon is convening the Sanhedrin. Napoleon offers a new and open world for the Jews. And what does Hasidim do? What did the first Rebbe of Lubavitch Chabad Hasidim say? Who should the Jews support? Shneur Zalman of Liadi, first Rebbe of Chabad Lubavitch, writes a letter. Should Napoleon be victorious, wealth among the Jews will be abundant, but the hearts of Israel will be separated and distant from their Father in heaven. But if our master, the Tsar Alexander, will triumph, though poverty will be abundant among the Jews, at least the heart of Israel will be bound and joined with their Father in heaven. Or it's hard to ascertain and assert your singularity as a chosen people in a democracy, to paraphrase Mordecai Kaplan. If you're ruled by a conservative reactionary, there's less impetus to sympathy. And therefore, the probability of religious observance, the way the Rebbe thinks religious observance ought to be observed, is higher. And maybe that is why, to some people in the Haredi community, a nationalist strongman like Trump is appealing, because it is a reason not to assimilate. Why should all of us take the issues I've raised this afternoon very seriously? Because it is a Nazi trope that Jews are spreaders of disease, as this poster from the 1930s in Poland intimates. Jews have a skull, they indicate death, they spread typhus, or this modern Polish anti-Semitic poster trying to link Jewish politicians with COVID-19. Anti-Semites love to say, look at the Jews, they're spreading the virus. Jews don't follow public health guidelines. Jews don't wear masks. Jews are the source of infection. Jews are an infectious agent, eradicate them. A famous Rebbe died in New York in November, about a month after the demonstrations. His body was taken to Kennedy Airport to be flown to Israel for burial. These are newspaper photographs of the procession about a month ago, taking the casket to the hearse to go to Kennedy. No masks, no social distancing, mass crowds in the middle of a pandemic. And that's why we should all take it seriously. Well, Edward, this was pretty serious stuff. Do you have perhaps a more lighthearted concluding story? I've got one for you. Hamodia decides to do a story about New York Medical College. So they need a head and shoulders picture of me. They want to take pictures of me talking to the students. But of course, Hamodia will not show pictures of women. And they certainly won't show pictures of men talking to women. When Hillary Clinton ran for president, if her picture was ever in Hamodia, it was pixelated. So they're only willing to take pictures of me talking to male students. And the photographer is really boring. So eventually I reach for one of my puppets that I have in my office. I have lots of puppets because we pediatric radiation oncologists have puppets for entertaining our patients. And I start fooling around with the puppet and making fun of the photographer. The article comes out and my public relations people are thrilled. Headline, Medicine and Morals, a medical school that can make a Jewish heart proud. the Hamish Medical School. Oh, goody, until the picture comes out on the front page, on the lead of the article. And there I am in a newspaper with a circulation of 160,000 a day with a big blue puppet. As I'm saying to the photographer, buddy, it's driving me crazy with the pictures. But I had the last laugh. I called up the reporter. Doctor, you pleased with the story? Terrific story. Listen, you said you wouldn't take pictures of me with women. That's right. But you're okay with taking pictures of me with a gender ambiguous blue puppet who's smooth between his legs. That's okay, huh? The reporter gets absolutely silent because he doesn't realize I'm pulling his legs. He thinks, oh no, now I'm in trouble. And that is the best I can do for a lighthearted story about this. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to your comments and feedback.